Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be going over the Benoni Defense, and the Benoni Defense is a very aggressive defense against the queen pawn opening from white. And I feel that as a black player you really want to have a lot of different defenses that you can throw at white, and d4 being a very popular opening for white. A lot of different openings that you can choose from. Obviously most players are familiar with Queen's Gambit accepted, Queen's Gambit decline lines. Today we're going to be going over the Benoni Defense, more importantly the Modern Benoni, which I believe to be the easiest variation of the Benoni to play. So we're going to go over the main line and kind of go over the key concepts that you want to think about when playing the Benoni. So it starts out with pawn to d4, and black responds with knight to f6, and then white's going to from here just bring his pawn to c4, and black's going to respond with pawn to c5. Now here, very infrequently you will see white just capture this piece right here, but white's going to have a really hard time holding on to this piece after black simply plays pawn to e6. White's pretty much going to have to completely destroy his queen side, and black's going to have a really good game. But more times than not, you're going to see what is the Benoni defense, which is white to d5. And this situation right here is what they refer to as the Benoni defense. And today we're going to be going over the Modern Benoni. You may have heard of like the Binko Gambit, which is basically bringing your pawn to b5. We're not going to be going over that today. It's kind of a harder gambit to play. It is very aggressive. But today we're going to be going over the Modern Benoni, and that basically starts with pawn to e6. And what this does is a few things. As you can see, white is already trying to take center control of the white squares. He has a defense here from the c4 pawn, and his pawn on d5 is very powerful. So we want to right away try to attack that piece. Now white has a few options here. Some of the more infrequent ones that you'll see is pawn can always just come to this d6 square. You won't see that very often, but just in case it does come across, I just want you to know what you can do. You can simply just bring your queen to b6 here, and it's basically attacking this b2 pawn, so white cannot bring another defender here to, let's say, the f4 square, because then black can simply come into the b2 square. So you won't see that very often. Every now and then you'll see a player capture here on e6. Obviously white would like to keep his pawn here, but a lot of times you will see this. Now if you do see this happen, make sure if you're black that you capture with your f pawn, and basically if you capture with your d pawn here, then white can simply come in and trade off queens, and you can no longer castle. So it's always important to look at which piece you're capturing with. So if white does decide to capture, it's not the main line, you won't see it as often. Make sure that you capture with your e pawn. Now basically your next move, you can just simply push your pawn to d5, opening up the center. Usually in the Modern Benoni you're going to fianchetto your bishop to the g7 square, but since we have captured with our f pawn to e6, we're not going to do that anymore. But once we castle kingside, we're going to have this open file on the f file, semi-open file, which is going to be very good for our rook. So this is a good situation, but you won't see it very often. What you will see very often is the main line, and that is simply knight coming to c3. And this is the main line. It's adding another defender to this d5 square. White really wants to have center control against the Benoni, and black really wants to have control of the dark squares, and he's basically eventually wants to fianchetto from the king side and control the center from the dark square. So we'll look at what that looks like. After white develops knight to c3, then black is going to capture. obviously we want to take away the center control that white has. And from here, white's going to recapture. You always want to recapture towards the center, which white does. And white has two defenders, the knight and the queen. So right now we can't capture this piece. And this is a very good piece for white. It really is. And this is going to be a focus point of the game, is white's control of the center housed around this piece right here, the D5 piece. So from here, we're going to just simply move our pawn up. We obviously don't want this pawn going any farther. You can see black is already starting to take control of the center dark squares. You can see that white has control of the light squares, and we want control of the dark squares. So we're going to go solidify our position a little bit. The D6 square is weak, so keep that in mind when you are playing. That is a huge weakness for black, so you always want to be watching this square. From here, the main line continues. White's going to develop to the main line is going to be pawn to E4, adding another defender to the D5 square and basically putting a lot more defense into its strong middle game. And you can see white's really focusing on the light squares, and so black's going to counter that and focus on the dark squares. And so what black is normally going to do from here is fianchetto on the king side, and that is pawn to G6, and then white's going to play pawn to F4, and then we're going to fianchetto with our bishop here. And this is the situation that I want to look at here. If you can tell, white has a very strong center control, and eventually black is going to castle kingside, and black is really trying to focus on the dark squares here. And you can see white at any time can come to bishop to B5 and check the king. And so there's a lot of things that you want to look at in this situation. A lot of players here will simply play pawn to A6, kind of stopping white from coming in here. But you want to make sure going on later in the game that you always pay attention, one, to your weakness on D6, but two, you want to look at this strong point on D5. Eventually white is going to want to have an outpost on this E6 or this C6 square with one of its knights. So keep that in mind. Eventually this game is going to bust open. Once black castles king side, he can bring his rook to this semi-open file on the E square, on this E file, and it's going to be a wide open game. So you want to keep that in mind. You want to control the dark square, so you don't want to trade off your dark square bishop. Your light square bishop, since white is controlling the light squares, if you can trade off light square bishops, then go ahead and do that, because their light square bishop is going to be a lot more powerful. So if you get in this situation, these are the things you just want to keep in mind. It is a very aggressive style. As you can see, this game can pretty much open up at any given time. It's not quite as closed as maybe a Queen's Gambit accepted line or Queen's Gambit decline line. So if you're looking for something a little bit different and you want possibly just to be really aggressive, then go ahead and try out the Benoni. I feel like it plays really well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully next time you come across a D4 opening, you can try this out and have success with it. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe, and I will see you guys next video. Thanks for watching.